Okay. So I'm beginning on June the 4th, 1916. This is volume 11. Jesus pours out his bitterness into Luisa so to spare the people. But it's too much for her to contain it all. So Luisa says, this morning it seemed that my beloved Jesus came. I clasped him to my heart and Jesus gave me a kiss. But as he was kissing me, I felt a most bitter liquid flow from his mouth to mine. I remained surprised in seeing that without praying him, sweet Jesus was pouring his bitterness into me. While at other times I had prayed him so much that but he had not conceded it to me. A thought has occurred to me that I've forgotten to give you in all the other reflections that I've given to you, and that is that St. Bernard of Clairvaux, 12th century, he's called the uncrowned king of the 12th century, wrote at least 2, if not 3, volumes of commentary on the Song of Songs. And he gave, as far as I can remember, about 8 sermons on the first line, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. How do you give 8 sermons, about 20 minutes long each, on that thing? And the thing I remember that he said, out of all the homilies, he said, don't think it is a romantic thing to give Jesus a kiss. That's what I'm reminded of now. Because he said on his lips there's vinegar and gall and bitterness. And if you approach him at that level, that's what the only thing he can share with you. It's not romance. That's why we're inclined to think of a kiss simply as a romantic sign or an affectionate sign. But with Jesus, it's not that. And so that's why Luisa said, I didn't even ask. And this time he gave me the bitterness that was within him. Okay? So then she said, I was filled with that most bitter liquid, but Jesus kept pouring. It spilled outside. Now, it spilled outside means that Luisa is not able to make reparation for all the sin that's going on in the world. So there will be chastisement. It spilled outside, it went to the ground, but he still kept pouring. So he was trying to indicate to her how deep the problems of the earth were at this particular time. So that there was a pool of that most bitter liquid formed around me and blessed Jesus. And then, as though relieved a little, now you understand a little because a lot of this has poured out onto the ground, he told me, daughter, have you seen how much bitterness souls give me? It is so much that unable to contain them any longer, I wanted to pour them into you. Now, she's always asking for this. But you couldn't contain them either. So they went to the ground. And they will pour upon the peoples. Okay? In other words, if I can't contain them and you can't contain them, they've got to go back on the people. So remember I said to you from the early volumes that sin goes up from the earth and comes back right as chastisements. In other words, we create chastisement. It's something we do ourselves because nothing unholy or unworthy can enter the presence of God. That's Hebrews 12:14. So, while saying this, he marked the various points and towns which were to be stricken by the invasions of foreign people. Now, that sounds as if you're talking about the invasion of Italy during the World Wars. And some were running away, and some were left naked and starved, some were exiled, some killed. Horror and fright everywhere. Jesus himself wanted to withdraw his gaze from so much tragedy. Frightened and terrorized, I wanted to prevent Jesus from doing this, but he seemed unshakable, and he told me, my daughter, it is their own bitterness that divine justice is pouring upon the people. That's what I said. We actually create the chastisement. So I want to give you 2 Corinthians 9:6. 2 Corinthians 9:6 and Galatians 6:7-8. So we even use this in our everyday language. We say that person is their own worst enemy. Is that right? Yeah. Or we say, should they create their own troubles? So Luisa said, Jesus said, I wanted to pour them in you first in order to spare some points and to make you content, because she's always asking for this. And what was left I would pour upon them. My justice demands satisfaction. See, all the attributes of God are equal. And we seem to think that if his justice doesn't work, that he's happier and we're happier. But just as every part of your being needs expression, so every part of his being needs expression as well. So Luisa said, my love and my life, I know little about justice, she said. If I pray you, it is for mercy, because that's her role as intercessor. I make appeal to your love, to your wounds, and to your blood. After all, they are always your children, your dear images. Okay, so the images are Romans 8, and I think it's 29. Okay. Poor brothers of mine, how shall they go on? Into what constraints shall they be put? To make me content, you tell me that you have poured into me, but some points are too few. But the points you spare are too few. Now what she's doing is something that had gone on since the time of Abraham. Do you remember Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18:32? You know, if I can get down from 50 to 45 to 40, and he goes down all the way to 5. But there weren't 5 decent men in the town. Then you have Moses, which is Psalm 106, verse 23. He stood in the breach, otherwise they would all have been killed. You also have Ezekiel 22:30. And Isaiah 59, verses 15 to 16. That gives you a way of looking at the intercessor's role. So the 2 new ones there are Ezekiel 22:30 and Isaiah 59, verses 15 and 16. Now, anyone who's called to be a victim soul is called to be an intercessor, so they always plead for the souls of the people, and they're prepared to pay a price for it as well. So Jesus said, on the contrary, he said, Luisa said it was too little, and he said, no, it's too much. It's because I love you, otherwise I would have spared nothing. Now, the thing that's very important there is the value God puts on one person. Luisa is only one person out of the whole planet, and she is making this request of God, and God hears her because he loves her in a special way. That's terribly important for anyone living in the divine will. You're in a special relationship with God, therefore he will hear you in a special way. And besides, have you not seen how you yourself were unable to contain any more? So Luisa burst out crying and said, yet you tell me that you love me, and where is all this love that you have for me? Now, what she's doing is using this love as a lever to see can she get more mercy for the people. That's her intercessory role. True love knows how to content the beloved in everything. And then, why don't you make me larger, she said, so that I can contain more bitterness to spare my brothers? Jesus cried with me and disappeared. But I would imagine when he disappeared, he smiled a little bit. Make me a bit bigger and I'll be able to hold it. Okay. Most of us don't ask to be made bigger physically. Certainly not to hold bitterness anyway. Whatever else. So there's a very important message coming up in June the 15th, 1916. I have a VIP on this one. In the divine will, everything is complete. Look at the word complete. The most powerful prayers over the heart of Jesus, and those which move him the most, are to clothe oneself with all that he himself did and suffered. Now, would you colour that in green, white and gold? I'm going to read it again. The most powerful prayers over the heart of Jesus, And those who move him the most are to clothe oneself with all that he himself did and suffered. Okay. So continuing in my usual state, my beloved Jesus came. He transformed me completely into him. And then he told me, daughter, pour yourself into my will. Now we usually say fuse. Same thing. Fuse yourself into my will in order to make complete reparations for me. Now notice complete because it will be divine and human. And it will involve all that Jesus has done. My love feels an irresistible need for them. That's for reparations. And so, after so many offences from souls, it wants one at least who, placing herself between me and them, there's the intercessor standing in the breach. And that's your Psalm 106, verse 23 again. Moses standing in the breach. So placing herself between me and them would give me complete reparation. You don't need the S in English. Would give me complete love for all, and would snatch from me graces for everyone. You hear Luisa doing that all the time. But you can only do this in my will. Now, would you circle the word only? It can't be done outside of fusing in the divine will. In other words, you can say the words, but it's not the action. Is that okay? This miracle only happens when we're fused in the divine will, in which you find me and you also find all souls. That's where we connect with all souls. Oh, with what yearnings am I waiting for you to enter into my will? That's to fuse. To be able to find in you the satisfaction and the reparation for all. Now the two S's are not required there. Only in my will you find the things in act. That means present, now, available, graceful and grace-filled. Because anything to do with God is now. There's no past, there's no future, everything is now. Because I am the engine, the actor and the spectator of everything. I love the engine. The church usually says that God is the prime mover. That's the engine that moves it forward. So, while he was saying this, Luisa said, I poured myself into his will. But who can say what I saw? I was in contact with every thought of every person. Look at that. This is how to influence people from within, from their deepest soul. I was in contact with the life which came from God, and I, in his will, multiplied myself in each thought. And with the sanctity of his will, I repaired everything. Do you see the power we have once we're fused in the divine will? I had a thank you for everyone and a love for everyone also. Then I multiplied myself in the gazes, in the words, and in everything else. So here's a perfect way to pray and intercede for others. But who can say all that was happening? I lack the terms, and maybe the very angelic tongues would stammer, and therefore I stop here. Now, that's one of the problems that anybody receiving a message from God has, and I put 1 Corinthians 2:9 there, that the eye cannot perceive and the ear cannot get it, all that God has prepared for us. And the problem is that she receives it in a purely spiritual manner on a spiritual plane, but she's trying to communicate it on a human plane, and to translate that language down into the human plane, she feels she can't do it because she's going to lose so much. Now, all the saints have had that problem. So Luisa said, I spent the whole night with Jesus in his will. Isn't that a lovely way to spend your night? Yeah. And then I felt the Queen Mother near me, and she told me, she's never far away if he's around. She told me, my daughter, pray. Now, she's been saying that for how many years? 35 years is it in Medjugorje? And Luisa said, my mother, let us pray together. I think that's brilliant. For by myself, I don't know how to pray. And she added, now this is her message to us, the most powerful prayers over the heart of my son, and those which move him the most, are for the soul to clothe herself with everything he did and suffered. Can't you see that she's repeating what Jesus said? Okay, she's underlining it. Since he gave everything as a gift to the soul. Now, I prefer the word soul to creature, because creatures include animals. Okay, and so the translator obviously wasn't thinking about the fact that creatures include animals. Therefore, my daughter, surround your head with the thorns of Jesus, bead your eyes with his tears, impregnate your tongue with his bitterness, clothe your soul with his blood, adorn yourself with his wounds, pierce your hands and feet with his nails, and like another Christ, present yourself before the divine majesty. Now, that way of praying you are reading in the hours of the Passion, because you hear Luisa actually praying that way. Okay. So, this sight, Blessed Mother said, will move him in such a way that he will not be able to deny anything to the soul who is clothed in his own insignia. Isn't that something? Mm-hmm. Now, how terribly important that is when we go to pray for family and friends and absolutely everybody. To know how to pray for them with authority and power that will have real effects. But how little do souls know how to make use of the gifts which my son gave them. Now, the souls that don't make use of the gifts are Catholics who are not really using the treasures of their faith. These were my prayers on earth. Now, that's the important thing there. In other words, she's saying how she prayed. And these are my prayers in heaven. That means you have the prayers of the co-redemptrix. And therefore, if we pray that way, we're praying with the Redeemer and the co-redemptrix. That's power. So, together, Luisa and Blessed Mother clothed themselves with the insignia of Jesus, and together they presented themselves before the divine throne. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? That you present yourself with Blessed Mother. This moved all, that means all the inhabitants of heaven. The angels made way for us and remained as though surprised. The surprise was to see somebody from the earth. They wouldn't be surprised at our Blessed Lady. I thanked Mother and I found myself inside of myself. Now that's something you've got to go back on and learn how to use. So August the 3rd, 1916. Each act of the soul that the soul does is one more paradise that she acquires in heaven. Luisa said, as I continue in my usual state, my beloved Jesus makes himself seen in passing, or he says a few words and then runs away, or he hides in my interior. Now, hides in my interior is Luke 17:21. The kingdom of God is within you. And I remember that one day he told me, my daughter, I am the center, and all creation receives life from this center. That's John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So, I am the life of every thought, of every word, of every action, of everything. But souls make use of this life I give them to take the occasion to offend me. I give life, and if they could, they would give me death, which of course is exactly what happened in the Passion, isn't it? Luisa says, I also remember that I prayed him to hold back the scourges, and he told me, daughter, do you think I am the one who wants to scourge them? No. On the contrary, my love is so great that I consumed my whole life in redoing what man was obliged to do. This is your divine version. Okay? So I consumed my whole life in redoing what man was obliged to do for the Supreme Majesty. And since my acts were divine, I multiplied them into so many as to redo them for all humanity and for each soul, in such a way as to fill heaven and earth and to keep man defended so that justice might not strike them. But man with sin breaks this defense. Now notice that the Lord has done everything he could to defend us, and we break the defence. And once the defence is broken, the scourges strike man. So I want to give you some scriptures which explain what happens when you have no shield and you have no defence. Is that okay? I only going to give you some of them. There's loads of them. Genesis 15:1. Psalm 3:3. Psalm 5:20. Psalm 28:7. Psalm 33:20. Now, in Genesis 15, the Lord says, I am your encircling shield. In other words, you are protected back and front, because in those days it was single combat, is the way they fought battles. An encircling shield wouldn't be any use if you have a bomb coming down on top of your head. So you have to just understand the context in which it is given. So if we drop that shield or let it go in any way, then that protection is gone. We're open to the enemy. But who can say all the little things he told me? Then this morning I was praying and lamenting to Jesus, for he was not answering me. Notice she expects to be answered, especially because he does not stop chastising. And I said to him, why pray to you if you do not want to answer me? On the contrary, you tell me that the evils will get worse. Now that's Amos 3:7, that he always tells the prophets ahead of time. And Jesus' answer was, my daughter, good is always good. Even more, you must know that each prayer, each reparation, each act of love, any holy thing that the soul does is one more paradise that she acquires. Really take note of that, will you? Each act, each prayer, each reparation, each holy thing. Now, even a holy thing, isn't that fantastic? Look how good he is. It's one more paradise that she acquires. So, the simplest holy act will be one more paradise, the simplest holy act. And there you are, trying to remain fused in him so that acts are being multiplied to infinity. Try and imagine the paradise he's going to give you. Isn't it incredible? So, in fact, every good act comes from God. And therefore, in every good act, the soul takes God. I like that. I don't know about you. So I put a ring around it. The soul takes God. Take possession of him. And since God contains infinite, innumerable, eternal, immense joys, so many that the very blessed will not arrive at enjoying them all throughout all eternity. Now, I have only one comment there. Wow. That it'll take all of heaven to try and grasp what God is actually offering you. So you won't be bored. I remember a class of teenagers telling me they'd be utterly bored in heaven because they'd be sitting there playing harps for all eternity. And at least there'd be something going on in hell. Very interesting. So that when the thing is not explained properly, you get across a terrible falsehood, So I said to them, you really are going to enjoy the fire? You really are going to enjoy the tortures, aren't you? You're going to call it, you're going to ask for more. I said, let's talk heaven, will we? Jesus says that since God contains infinite, innumerable, eternal, immense joys, that the very blessed will not arrive at enjoying them all throughout all eternity. I love that. It's no wonder then that since each good act acquires God, God is almost bound to substitute them with many contentments. So, if the soul suffers even distractions for love of me, now You're doing your hour's adoration and you find yourself distracted. Do you get upset with yourself? Give out to the other people who are distracting you? Or realize, I've got divine currency here? The thing we've got to realize all the time in living the divine will, that is that everything, no matter what happens to you, is divine currency. Okay. So I've been offering my eyes in the divine will, that the Lord will open the eyes of the nation, that they will discover God again. It's one of the things. I've been doing other things as well, but that's one of them. And everything is divine currency. It's fantastic, you know. So if the soul suffers even distractions for love of me, in heaven her intelligence will have more light. That means more understanding. It's fantastic. And will enjoy as many more paradises for as many times as she has sacrificed her intelligence. That means instead of demanding to understand something, that you offer the fact that here and now you don't. That's a novel way of doing it, isn't it? I think it's brilliant. And so much more will she understand God because of that sacrifice. If she suffers coldness for love of me, so many paradises will she enjoy of the variety of contentment that are present in my love. If darkness, that means it feels almost like unbelief, so many more contentment in my inaccessible light. Okay, so inaccessible light is 1 Timothy 6:16. God lives in unapproachable light. 1 Timothy 6:16. God lives in that verse actually says, God lives in unapproachable light. So this is what one prayer more or less means. So I put a big NB beside that. One prayer more or less is one paradise more or less. Your choice. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah.
Okay. So August the 6th, 1916. The need of Jesus for souls who live in the divine will to multiply. In other words, other people need to come to, or there's another one there as well. They need to come to enter into the divine will because of us. Is that okay? So I have a big NB beside this and a heading which says, we need more people. So all of us have to reach out to try and help others to come into the divine will. So as I was in my usual state, my sweet Jesus came for just a little, Luisa said. And he said to me, my daughter, my love feels an irresistible need for souls to live in my will to multiply. Therefore, we can't get off the hook. We've actually got to try and help people to come and enter the divine will. Because they are the places of my quarters. Now, the people who use the term quarters are usually soldiers and people like that. So it's the place where I live, is what he wants to say. In other words, each one of us is a place where he lives. That's 1 Corinthians 3:16. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Know you not that you are the temple of the living God? Okay. My love wants to do good to everyone, but sins prevent me from pouring my benefits upon them. Therefore, I keep searching for souls in the divine will. That's these quarters. You see them? It's a strange language. So I'm just giving it to you with its meaning. I keep searching for souls in the divine will, and in them, in these souls, I am not prevented from pouring my graces, and through them, the towns and the people that surround them take part in them. Would you please put a huge sign there? Name the town or the area you come from. You don't have to say it out loud. And Jesus says the place you live will benefit. So that means that Selbridge and all its surrounds will benefit from me living in the divine will. Sometimes I remind myself that when I'm walking down the street. See, all these people are benefiting and they don't even know. Isn't it wonderful? Therefore, the more places I have to live on earth, the greater vent can I give to my love. In other words, the more of these temples of the Holy Spirit that the Lord has, that he can operate in and through, the more he can pour out his love. Now, our country desperately needs to be saturated with God's love, and therefore people living in the divine will are the ones who can let it happen. So the greater vent I can give to my love, and the more it pours itself into benefits for the good of all humanity. Okay. Now, I want to give you 2 Corinthians 2:14. 2 Corinthians 2:14, where St. Paul says that we are partners of Jesus' triumph, spreading the knowledge of him everywhere. Partners in his triumph. Now, that's even more important for us than it was for Paul. When Paul was writing that, he was thinking of a triumphal procession in Rome when the Romans really made a fuss of the general who won the battle, do you know? But we are, as Greg says to us, we are actually putting the red carpet together for his return. I love that image, and he's really beautiful. Okay, so we have a huge task to do. So August the 10th, 1916. How in the divine will our pains are together with those of Jesus. Now, so whatever we're suffering, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, it's there, it's with Jesus, and therefore has all the infinite merits of his pains, and then we can offer them in the divine will for whoever we want. Continuing in my usual state, I was feeling embittered because of the privation of my beloved Jesus, and I was lamenting to him that each privation he caused me was a death that he gave me, and a cruel death. That's simply indicating the enormity of her love, such that while one feels death, one cannot die. And I said, how can you have the heart to give me so many deaths? And Jesus told me, my daughter, do not lose heart. When my humanity was on earth, it contained all the lives of creatures, and these lives all came from me. Okay. So watch where this is going. So he says, when on earth, he said, his humanity contained the lives of all creatures, and how many of them would not return to me because they would die and bury themselves in hell. Now, for him to die actually means to go to hell, because to separate the soul from the body is not actually the tragedy. It's to separate the soul from God is. And I felt the death of each one which tormented my humanity. Do you see where he's going with this? He's trying to tell Luisa, since you do feel a cruel death, why don't you enter into me, fuse with me, unite with the suffering that I had, and you will gain many, many souls. So I want to give you Colossians 1:18. Colossians 1:18. And 1 Corinthians 12:12. And Jesus continues, these deaths were the most sorrowful and cruel, the pain in my whole life. That's because God is love, and he didn't want to lose anyone. Up to my last breath, he said. Naturally, because in his dying, there was the thief that didn't repent, you remember? Mm-hmm. My daughter, don't you want to take part in my pains? The death you feel because of my privation is nothing but a shadow of the pains of death which I felt because of the loss of these souls. Okay. Now here's the first hint. We're still in volume 11. There's a lot to go yet. This is the first hint that Luisa is experiencing a divine pain. It's not just human. She is permanently in the divine will. Okay. And I want to give you 2 Corinthians 1, verses 6 and 9. 2 Corinthians 1, verses 6 and 9, talking about suffering and what to do with it. And 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 and 17. Therefore, now that you know this, Jesus said, give this death to me. Whatever it is you're suffering, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, give it to him. Let him make divine currency out of it. Give it to me to sweeten the many cruel deaths that my humanity suffered. Let this pain, that is, of the privation, flow in my will. Whatever it is, let it flow in the divine will, and you will find mine. That's Jesus' pain. And uniting with it, it will run for the good of all, especially for those who are about to fall into the abyss. So Jesus is asking her, since the pain is intense, she finds it very difficult, he's asking her to use it to save people from hell. Because, as I say, the death of the body is not actually the problem. It's the death of the soul is the problem. Now, if you keep it for yourself, clouds will form between you and me. And you know, in clouds you don't really see one another. And the current of my will be broken between you and me. Now, why would the current be broken? Because she will be doing something that displeases him. She's complaining instead of using divine currency. Your pains will not find mine. You will not be able to diffuse yourself for the good of all. And you will feel all the weight of it. In other words, you'll get all of the negative side of your suffering. Whereas if the suffering is turned to absolute good for others, no matter how bad it is, there's a survival in it. On the other hand, if you think of how to let everything which you may suffer flow in my will, there will be no clouds for you, and the very pains will bring you light. In other words, your understanding is deepened, and so on. It's wonderful. And it will open new currents of union, love, and grace. Now, there's something you need to underline. Because Jesus is saying, if we have the wisdom and the love to unite anything that causes us pain and suffering and struggle, to unite it with the sufferings and pains and struggles of Jesus' life and in the divine will, and offer them to save souls from falling into hell, he said, it will open new levels of divine union between himself and you. In other words, you will grow in union with God. And there will be tremendous grace attached to that. That's a very important message. In fact, there'll be VIPs on most of the stuff, because as we go on into volume 12, every single bit of it are jewels, you know. So, August the 12th, 1916, the glory of the souls who will live in the divine will on earth. So really watch this one. So we have the privilege of living in the divine will on earth, and Jesus is talking about the glory of those souls, okay? So Luisa said, I was fusing myself in the most holy will, and my sweet Jesus said, my daughter, only one who lives in my will do I feel as though repaid for creation, redemption, and sanctification. That's the three fiats. Notice he says repaid, and yet we're absolute nothings. That's the incredible thing. But at least he's getting a response. You know yourself as a parent that if a child responds positively and lovingly to something you try to do for them, you feel repaid, don't you? That they can't pay you in money, that's not the issue. Money is actually nothing. To be repaid in love and gratitude is the joy of a parent, isn't it? And makes you feel it was all worthwhile, even though there was great trouble involved in it. So that's what Jesus is saying, that to respond in love and gratitude and in the divine will to him, as far as he's concerned, he's repaid for his trouble. Therefore, these souls will be the gems of my throne. And we have to balance this extraordinary thing that on the one hand, of ourselves, we're absolute nothings. And on the other hand, then we're gems on his throne. Isn't it amazing? Therefore these souls will be the gems of my throne and will take within themselves all contentment. Notice the word all. And the glory which each blessed will have for himself alone. They will be able to take within themselves all the contentment and the glory which each blessed will have for himself alone. You can actually reach out for it all. These souls will be as though queens around my throne, and all the blessed will be around them. Now notice the queens. That reference there is to the Song of Songs, and you have the chosen bride, and you've got all these other queens. Now in heaven, the chosen bride, of course, is Blessed Mother, and then we are her maiden companions, the other queens. These souls will be as though queens around my throne, and all the blessed will be around them, because they didn't have the privilege of living the divine will on earth. And just as the blessed will be as many suns that will shine in the celestial Jerusalem, the souls who have lived in my will shine in my own sun. Now notice there are sun and sons. Okay. Now the celestial Jerusalem is Revelation 21:22. And if you go to Revelation 21, you'll be told that the dwellers in this new Jerusalem needed no sunlight because Jesus was the sun. Okay, so here you have this image of all the dwellers in the New Jerusalem. Jesus is the sun for them, but the people who have lived in his will are actually in the sun. Isn't that something else? He said, they will shine in my own sun. They will be as though circumfused with my sun. And these souls will see the blessed from within me. Talk about privileged position. It's absolutely amazing. Because it is right that having lived on earth united with me, with my will, now notice it's with my will, okay? As they have lived no life of their own, because we've given up the human will for the divine, they have a distinct place from all the others in heaven. Now he comes back to this point many, many times as we go from here to the 36 volumes. They have a distinct place in heaven, and they continue in heaven the life that they have lived on earth. In other words, you continue living in the divine will. Completely transformed in me, so therefore other Christs, and immersed in the sea of my contentment. I think that's not a bad reward. Okay, so how about putting a heading there, reward, at the top? Because human beings are inclined to say, well, you know, is there anything at the other end of the line? Is it all give, give, give? Now, I'm going to stop there for a few minutes.